Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the BuzzStream podcast. I'm your host, Vince Nero, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Dixon Jones. You might know Dixon from his many years with Majestic, where he's still a brand ambassador, but nowadays he's CEO over at Inlinks, and their kind of newer tool, I guess, in the past few years, Waikay. And we're going to be talking a lot about AI tracking presence and measurement, because this seems to be coming up a lot. We're going to dig into something that I thought Dixon and his team covered really well, with this idea of like topical presence. And it's a metric that Waikay has. So before we get into all that, I just want to remind people to like, subscribe, share this stuff with your colleagues. The more that we can get this stuff out there, the more we can continue to have great guests on, like Dixon. And secondly, just a reminder to check out ListIQ if you're in the digital PR realm. It's our AI powered media list building tool. It helps you build lists directly from Google News and saves a ton of time digging, finding stuff like email addresses and bios and recent articles. It's getting some great feedback, and we're constantly updating with new features and stuff. So definitely check it out. That's it. Let's get into this podcast. Dixon, how you doing? Hey, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm definitely checking out ListIQ after this for sure.
Appreciate that. Dixon, you and I think, met at Brighton SEO. We were on a panel about link building. And I think that was, 2 years ago? And that might have been right when you were launching Waikay, right?
Yeah, well, actually, Waikay launched only last year, about this time last year, maybe April last year. And so, yeah, it's been out almost.
I'm getting my Brightons mixed up, I guess.
It's okay. It's it's true. Yeah. Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about it. So we were talking about this before, and I recommend Waikay to a lot of people. And I think one of the reasons I do is it's funny. I think a lot more tools are starting to follow this model, but you were at launch one of the only tools to really help people understand what to do with all this information. I feel like that was a very critical feature missing from a lot of tracking, AI tracking tools. So let's talk a little bit about what Waikay is and what the name means. First of all, I think
let's
would be
start
a good
with the
start.
name, shall we? Because I appreciate that people are out there, they can't pronounce it, can't spell it. We don't have the .com. There's a lot that goes into it. Until you know that Waikay stands for what AI knows about you, then it's kind of one of those brand names that you just don't know why it's there. But as soon as you know that, and then our plan was that you then talk about it on a podcast or in a lift or at a conference or whatever, and you'd say it's Waikay. Anyway, it stands for what AI knows about you. Job done. That's that was the plan anyway. But you're absolutely right. When we launched a year ago, lots of other tools were out and launching as well. So I think Profound was already out, and then there was a bunch of other ones jumping out maybe a little after us. But the vast majority of them decided, right, let's try and take rank checking and turn it into a tool that for AI. Rank checking for AI is kind of what the developers were sort of all thinking about when they went. That wasn't what we were thinking about. What we thought about was, okay, somebody is going to come along and say, what is the best vacuum cleaner brand? Or whatever the question may be. And it could be that they weren't even going to type in anything. They were going to just get an email from somebody that asks them a bunch of questions, and then the person is going to just press a button on their Outlook or whatever and just say, reply to this email with some ideas or something like that. So my thinking of how people were going to be using LLMs wasn't based on, let's find out how many people type in this particular question in a week, a year, or whatever. It was, you're never going to track that in a month of Sundays. So what we really need to understand is whether the AI understands your business and your brand correctly in the context of what you do, so that you have a very real possibility of being in the response in the first place. So we didn't start by a prompt tracking system that was trying to, ask the question, what is the best vacuum cleaner brand 500 times and seeing whether you're in there and how many times you're in there. What we were trying to do at the start was say, right, what if that's what you're trying to do, if you're trying to be the best, the vacuum cleaner that keeps on getting, cited by the AIs as one to go and buy, then what we wanted to do first was to just ask the AIs, all of the AIs once, what do you know about, and let's say it was Dyson or Shark. Shark's American, I think. So what do you know about Shark in the context of vacuum cleaners? And allow the AI to fully spill the beans on what it knows, basically. And then what we do is say, right, okay, that's what you've said you know about AI, about vacuum cleaners and in the context of Shark. Now let's go to beforehand, we will have gone to your Shark website, seen what you've said about your brand in the context of vacuum cleaners. And what we do is we create a knowledge graph of topics from the AI response and from the website output. And then we match that up to give a score of how accurate the AI was in describing that topic in the context of your brand. We didn't go from the idea of, there's a million different, there's more people typing in asking about vacuum cleaners than there are asking about suction for carpet cleaning or whatever. We went from the point of view of your business is unique to you. You've defined that on your website. You've potentially spent billions on your website and your story on your website. Let's not start by building a tool that just throws that out the window. Let's start by building a tool that works upon what your business already is. And so all of the recommendations and ideas that extrapolate from that is based on where the AI has misinterpreted or misunderstood your brand. And it was only later when we saw the competitors doing this prompt tracking kind of thing of how many times is your brand being seen in the context of best vacuum cleaner versus the other brands, that we started to create a proper prompt analysis tool, but we still kept to this idea of knowledge graphs. So what we're doing is we're analyzing the output of the prompts. So when you say what is the best vacuum cleaner, we'll analyze those prompts, turn them into the underlying topics so that we can see when Dyson comes back, what are the topics that it's associated with? When Shark comes back, what are the associated topics, etc. That allows us to take any prompt and create this topical presence idea. So what we're doing with topical presence, and I may be saying an awful lot in a very short amount of time now, is we're seeing not just what your share of voice is. Your share of voice is how many times your brand comes back compared to the number of times all the other brands come back. Let's divide one by the other, and that's your share of voice sort of thing. Topical presence is how closely associated, how well does the AI understand your response and the content that you've got in relation to the other websites the other brands that are being mentioned. So if Dyson comes back always in the context of suction, and Shark always comes back in the context of dog-free, hair-free entanglement, etc. You can start to see where the gaps are in the methodology. So wherever we go, the topic reports push people right from the start into getting a better topical presence. And then our prompt analysis is really about working out where your topical presence is weak, what it is you need to cover more of in order to be better understood by the LLMs in the future. Does that make sense, or did I go too much?
No, for sure. No, I think there's a handful of things in there to kind of tease out, and one of the things I want to start kind of at the beginning is this idea of like SEOs viewing this stuff as like wanting more of like a rank tracker almost. They were like a prompt,
Yeah.
And how that is not realistic. I mean, do you think there's going to be a point where a ChatGPT or a Gemini, has some sense of the types of prompts and that they'll start bucketing them into like, almost like a search volume? Like, are we ever going to get to that point?
Well, I think that, people like Profound are trying to do that already, and they're trying to use clickstream data or whatever their secret source is to give you some numbers. But the numbers are entirely unrealistic, and it doesn't take a genius to go back and think about it and say, there was some flawed methodology in there. We've got a data source that we can work with, and let's go with it. That's not how people are using AI anymore. So, and maybe they weren't at the start. And I want people to go back and think about something physical. like I go for trainers. I'll go away from vacuum cleaners because I don't want to, I don't know. I want to change the analogy. So, trainers. There's something that people buy. They buy in a shop or they buy online, but it's a physical product. And most businesses, not SEOs, but most businesses sell things. They make things and sell things, right? And it's only the news outlets that are really sort of selling information. Most of us are selling, even if it's a SaaS, it's a technology that is helping to understand the world's information. So the thing that has changed, and the reason that search volume or click volume, firstly, click volume is completely irrelevant in this world, is that what the user is doing with the AI is trying to get the AI to do all the legwork for them. So there is no click. There is the person asking a question on an AI, the AI going out and looking at a whole load of different data from your own website, from your competitor's website, from review websites, whatever it may be, synthesizing that information in seconds or minutes and coming back with a coherent argument for why you should be going with these ideas or where you should be going with these products or these ideas. So there is no click involved in that. There is, however, some rationale of having a well-structured, well-defined website so the AI can understand it as well as a human, and then it can do the heavy lifting for you. And you think about that person as a VA, a virtual assistant, or a real human being, if you see what I mean, or it's or AI agent, you can call them, but they're doing the same thing. They're producing this coherent argument. It's as if you're the managing director and you've asked your PA to go and find you some information, and that's what's happened in the course of a second. So search. So click volume, completely pointless. The decision is made before the user clicks. The decision is made because they've already seen all the other arguments, why you should buy your product instead of the other person. That buying decision is made before the click. So the click, definitely not a metric that you should have. But this other idea of the way in which people are consuming AI is also really, really important, because I gave you the example of somebody just pressing a respond to this. The prompt is reply to this email. That's what the prompt is to the AI, as far as a human is concerned. There is no obvious relevance, and the vast majority of good intel from AI are when you tell the AI to summarize this information over here. So upload a file and then say, read this, or whatever it may be. When you're adding your data layer into what the AI can do, the AI is really, really good. So summarize this is another very common prompt. Summarize this, and then there's this file. And I think that until we understand that the user journey is like this, then we don't understand that search volume means nothing.
Yeah, I mean, we've had internal conversations about this. I remember before I was even hired at BuzzStream, I remember the guys calling me and being like, "What's your take?" Like, we're just getting some sense of like what people are thinking, because I was working at Siege Media at the time, and it was like,
right, yeah.
I think the thought process then, and it's kind of true now, is just this idea of like people are just a lot better informed as buyers because they're doing all the research, and then they're going to your website much more informed. And it seems like we're seeing that, but it's to your point, like they're doing all the research on AI beforehand and, gathering all that information and kind of top funnel is almost out the door. So like all that search volume doesn't really matter anymore, even if it is,
Right. So our philosophy has been, well, let's make sure that the AI understands us right. Okay, I may be the smallest cog in the wheel. I may be the smallest brand, but as long as they absolutely understand who I am and why I'm there, then I've got as much chance as anybody of being, surfaced in the right context. When somebody asks the more complicated the question, the smaller the brand, the more focused they are. If they're profitable, then they're focused on a much narrower vertical. They're probably not. They're not selling all the plane journeys on all the airlines and stuff like that, because they're going to get beaten by a Expedia or whatever. So I think that a small brand has to be narrow in its story, and the better it explains that the DNA of its own business to the then the more likely it'll surface in those responses. But so it's not about the traffic anymore. It's
Yeah, I
about
mean,
sale.
yeah, for sure. Right. Like and I'm trying to write this down. I mean, it's almost like you want to be there for when the person is ready to make that choice. Right. And like you want to be, even if you're very niche, if the
Mm.
question is, I want black trainers that are solid arch support for lower back pain or something, you
Yeah.
want to be. And so I guess you can look at AI. It's like, it's not a brand awareness tool, a vehicle. It's more of like I don't even know, you
Product
want to,
differentiation tool.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
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 We gotta,
So
as brands, we gotta focus on why we're different to the other guys, not why we're the same as the other guys.
love that. And so I want to tease out another thing that you had mentioned a couple times, because I think this is super important for the digital PR listeners and the link builders who are listening about this. So this idea of like having a uniform brand message, right, across all of your platforms, and this is something that Waikay can, I feel like is the crux of what you provide, is helping to understand where those differences might be, where
Mhm.
you are positioning yourself as, we are the trainers for lower back pain, but everybody else out there, or at least the AI models, see you as the best trainers for teenagers,
Yeah,
whatever.
for running the New York Marathon. Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
right. Something
Yeah.
completely different than what you're putting out. And that seems to keep coming back. And anytime I I was just at this like roundtable thing, and when I was in Manchester with the Reboot team, it's another agency out there, and
Mhm.
that was like the crux of where we ended up. It was just like this idea of like, you have to be consistent across everything that you're talking. So your LinkedIn profile needs to
Yeah.
say what you want, as well as what, people are talking on Reddit needs to mimic that. And so I guess my question then is, what are some solid steps you can take if you are seeing within the tool, right?
Yep.
Or you're seeing on your own that, hey, we want to be known for this. I mean, I run into this with BuzzStream. We want to be known as a digital PR tool, but we've existed for 15 years as more of a link building tool, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we're still on every listicle under the sun as a link building outreach tool or CRM.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
if we want to reinforce that we are a link digital PR tool, what
Yep.
are the steps? What are some
I
realistic
so
things?
so the way that, and I'm not pretending that we've got it perfect yet, but but right at launch, what we did was we built a hallucination or fact checking module. So what we did is we did it instead of a sentiment analysis score. We can talk about why we didn't launch a sentiment analysis as well if we got time. But what we did was said, right, okay, what do we know about this brand in the context? AI, what do you know about this brand in the context of this product? Let it fill out all this information. Now we've got all these free form answers from the LLM. So if we got one topic and one brand, we've still got 5 or however many LLMs we want to analyze. Let's reduce what they've said into facts, one-liners. This is saying that this one is prominent in the UK, or this one does this, or this one does that. So one-liners, and then it becomes very easy for a human to go down and check. Is that right? Is that right? Is that right? So the things that we found that have been wrong in this process, so the hallucinations that are coming out, firstly, we're finding that, or some research we did internally, I heard, hallucinations are running around about 8% on average. So in other words, there's a lot of brand hallucination out there of things that are going wrong. Some of those, for example, are, I'll pick on myself first. I'll pick on Inlinks first. So we had one where it said Inlinks is a rank checking tool. Now, when Inlinks is not a rank checking tool, it's an entity SEO technology, but it doesn't check rankings. So we tracked that back to one review of Inlinks that was a positive review of Inlinks somewhere, but they'd added this feature that we don't actually have. So we don't want to say that we're a rank checking software if we're not, because that takes a little bit of brand equity around what we actually do. So on this occasion, we were able to just go and contact them, point out we didn't do that. They were delighted to make their content better. We were also delighted to find it so we could link to it as well. So they got a link out of it as well. So, and then another good example, there's an I keep on coming back to this, and I apologize to Jason Hennessy for this one, but I keep on coming back to it because when I first launched this, I was at a conference in Phoenix somewhere, and I was showing this to Jason Hennessy, who runs a digital agency, Hennessy.com, and in the States. Back in the SEO days, he was doing his link building, and there was a company called Hennessy Auto Parts or something like that. And so to differentiate, he convinced them to put a link on their website saying, if you're looking for SEO, go to Hennessy.com. And then, of course, he's Hennessy.com with an EY, but there's also Hennessy Brandy, which is Hennessy without the E. So when you ask, what do you know about Hennessy.com, then the AI came back and it was saying, firstly, it's an auto parts manufacturer, and it was citing this it's auto parts manufacturer, which said, if you want an SEO company, go to. So it got confused with SEO on the auto parts site, and then it was also getting it confused with Brandy as well, which is entirely, not surprising because it just fixes the typos, and it does that at the query phase, not at the analysis phase. So there are a few things that Hennessy.com can work on. And it happens with all businesses, because we never really thought about it this way around. So fact checking is the answer to your question. Hallucinations need to be fixed, because if you allow a false narrative to get out there in the LLMs and you don't address it as a brand, then over time it will carry on, propagating a miscommunication, should we say. And it is hard to move the ship. So for BuzzStream, for Inlinks, for any of us in the SEO industry, to move the ship, is hard if the AI already has this legacy training data that you were something else. And it's going to take some effort to move your ship. So the more we can get it right in the first place, the better. The less we have to turn the ship, the better. But we all have to, as brands, we have to move. So we need to let the AI, be able to see what the AI is saying as we move our
ship. Yeah. Also, one of the things I also wanted to talk to you about, I think the reason I kind of reached out initially was I was reading a post on the Waikay blog about your metric of topical presence, AI topical presence. So this is kind of a way for you to understand, if you are a brand, how AI views you, right? And you can help kind of maybe rectify or right the ship if it is veering off into, a different topic than you want to be known for. So can you tell me a little bit more about topical presence?
So topical presence does work around an individual prompt. So, having built a product that went out there and was ignoring individual prompts, the rest of the world was doing prompts, prompt tracking. How many times was your brand being mentioned in this prompt, regardless of the volume, So, of course, we needed a product that competed with that. So we did exactly what everybody else does, or similar to what everybody else does, in that we sit there and you can choose day, week, couple of days, whatever it may be. You can ask the question to the AIs and all the different AIs. And what we do is we automatically see the brands in the responses. So a lot of the tools, you have to list all your competitors. We don't. We automatically find all the competitor brands that come back. So every time you're asking a prompt to, what is the best trainer for the New York Marathon, then firstly, is that trainer a human being that's teaching you, or is that trainer something on your feet? There's a big question right there. But what is the best trainer for the New York Marathon? And it's going to come back with a bunch of brands, and it may come back with a couple of well-known trainers for the heroes in the world, the people. But those brands are going to then come back, and you carry on asking that question every day, or every other day, or every week, and you ask it of 5 or 10 different LLMs. So if you ask that every day for a week of 10 LLMs, you've got 70 different answers already in 1 week, and so that's. And each one of those is going to mention maybe 5 brands each time. So you've got 350 brand mentions. Some of them will be the same, but you've got a bunch there. You've got a share of voice now. You can see how many times your brand is cited compared to all of the brands that are cited. So now you have a share of voice, which is not confined by you saying who you think your competitors are. That's a great way to suddenly get more share of voice, because if you don't mention Adidas when you're Nike, you choose not to mention Reebok, and you choose not to mention the other competitors in those responses, then and you've upped your share of voice. So you're not allowed to choose your own competitors now. So that share of voice is interesting. Topical presence, though, is what we found is the other missing factor. So when you type in what is the best shoe for the New York Marathon, then some topics become more important than others. You mentioned back pain and stuff like that. So back pain becomes not important for that occasion, but durability may become an important thing. So durability might be important. Concrete might suddenly be an important topic because that's where you're hitting your feet on and stuff like that. So these kind of topics then that come back gives us a share. We can see these topics that are coming back. What we can do is use for that very specific prompt the topics that are coming back and compare that to the knowledge graph of the topics on your website as your footprint of who you are to see what your topical presence is. So topical presence is a measure of the breadth and depth and consistency of the topics that you're talking about on your website compared to the breadth and depth and consistency of those topics that the LLMs are bitting back about you.
Yeah, I mean,
and it's a score out of 100, but it only applies to each individual prompt on time. So each prompt will have its own topical presence score.
Yeah. That was going to kind of be my follow-up. So is this the kind of thing where you need to, or can you, find yourself in a hole where you're going deep in a specific prompt type, but missing a big, like, how do you recommend people kind of build these prompts?
The way that we're doing it, we've got topical presence. I'll say it's by individual prompt, but we also, if you've got 100 prompts, then what we'll do is we'll bag those prompts into groups. So you can tag things. So that these are the prompts about the New York Marathon. These are the prompts about back pain, or these are the prompts about, price or whatever it may be. So it'll auto tag, but you can change those tags around as well. So you can then take a basket of questions that people might be asking LLMs, and then seeing, what things are consistently coming back for each of those baskets. But I think this is a start of a journey. I mean, having a metric that gives you accuracy, for want of a better word, of your topics is only really the start, because what it does do is it shows you where you're missing coverage, and it's actually the coverage in the LLM. So if the LLM doesn't know that your shoe is good for a hard wearing surface, then it may be that you haven't talked about it on your website. It may be that you have and it hasn't picked it up. Either way around, that's where the hole is,
Yeah.
So you then need to go and make sure that your website is covering it so that it's fine. It may be ultimately that a third-party website is where it needs to be. You need to hammer that out with BuzzStream tools to get your message out to third parties. And I think that's the magic bit that certainly Waikay doesn't do, is getting that message out through to third parties is a vital part of it. But it's what's in the message. If you need to talk about concrete, you need to talk about concrete, and you wouldn't necessarily have known that until you'd seen that the LLM is saying, the New York Marathon is all roads. You really need to have good road wearing shoes. What's a road wearing shoe? Oh, let's go and find out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic segue into this idea of digital PR and link building. I'd love to get your take. I mean, you kind of answered it there, but like, if you can elaborate a little bit more on the role of third party, and let's stick specifically to digital PR, because that's where everyone's gravitating towards. But the role of digital PR in helping increase, the messaging and getting your brand associated with the right keywords and messages.
It's really interesting right now, because I'm sure you must have seen this in some conversations that you've had internally as well. But there is a rise, or has been in 2020, last year. So we're as we're recording this is 2026, April 26th. But over the last 12 months, we noticed that there was a huge reignition, if you like, of listicles sites. So people talking about, here's the top 10 Christmas card companies, or whatever it may be. And those listicles were acting as a third-party reference for the LLMs. So what is happening at the LLMs is that if they understand your business properly, that's great. But what they like to do is, if they're going to cite anything, is cite a third-party source if they can, rather than your own website, which is a bit frustrating for the brand, for sure. And it's not a black and white thing. But clearly, if you've got your brand cited in the right place alongside your competitors out in sort of newsland, third-party land, then that definitely increases the chance of you being cited in the response, because it likes third-party stuff. What went wrong about that for the LLMs is that they don't have anything like PageRank to hand. Maybe Gemini does, but but I think they've over-relied on the fact that this content was all equally valuable as they crawled all the web, not on the fly, but in the past. They were assuming that the listicle that was written by, me about Christmas cards, because 10 years ago I had a Christmas card client, versus me writing an article about SEO where I'm known and I have some kind of value. These are totally different values, because one's an authoritative piece and one's Dixon trying to spam the internet. So I think, and they didn't have a real decent metric. And I hope that somebody goes out there from the LLM world and says, right, well, let's just go and get all the data from Majestic, because Majestic's got this proxy for PageRank, which is just brilliant. But we'll see if that ever happens. I don't know. I'm not part of Majestic anymore, so I wouldn't know. I don't have any secrets, so all I am is a way to play with Majestic, and they may not. I think third-party citations really help to get yourself more likely to be into the results. But ultimately, that context of your own story is the way in which you control that narrative, I think.
Yeah, right. So to kind of bring it home and back around to the stuff we talked about at the beginning. So it's like, if you are pushing out some messaging in, even in the news, right? Like, I know a big piece of this, a digital PR, a strategy a lot of people rely on is like city index studies, right? So like the best cities for whatever, compiled by whomever website.
Yeah.
I think the missing piece sometimes for people is that like contextual, like messaging around your brand in any campaign that you do. At least the way that I've kind of understood this is like, if I was getting a link or a mention, I would want to push for whoever journalist or blogger who's going to mention me to say digital PR tool, BuzzStream, every single time I say that. And not only there, but then make sure I match that on my internal properties, my owned properties, like always mentioning our stuff together so that you kind of own that. I mean, is topical presence, I guess, in that topic. If people are talking about digital PR tools, that's what you want to be known for.
So I see it like this, in that you need that citation to get the hook, for the LLM to give your brand, to put your brand in the list. And then what will happen as a human being is they'll say, well, tell me more about Waikay, tell me more about BuzzStream, or rather, tell me more about this digital PR element, or this, this more narrow form of marketing, or whatever it may be. So they'll dig. The user will dig, and once you're in the list, then it's a case of, oh, okay, I've now got to go and check all those ones and see which ones do digital PR, which ones do link building, which ones do trainers for roads or whatever it may be. Right. And then it's when it's got into your ecosystem, your website, and it understands your website, then if your story is clear, you're absolutely going to do all the stuff that your salesperson out there was supposed to be doing for you, for your brand. And so then it becomes a place of clarity, but you've got to get it through to that initial leap of faith, really. And that is quite hard for smaller brands, because the AIs they did their training data years ago or months ago or whatever, a long time ago. And they're using RAG, search retrieval at the last minute to suddenly get these new sites. So the way that they're working is that the hook is usually in the RAG element, the search engine lookup element. But once we're there, the AI will then dive into that website and get all of the salient information from that website, and that's where we win, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Dixon, this has been great. I feel like we should maybe close it there, because like this, I want everybody to definitely go check out Waikay if they haven't. Obviously, we're check out Inlinks if you haven't as well. But, if we're talking about AI, getting this idea and getting everybody on board at your company with this idea of like putting forth the same messaging across all aspects, I just think that seems to be more important than ever. And it's something that, like, if you and I were just talking about marketing in general, right, or building a business, it's like, yeah, obvious, right? But like nowadays, I feel like, especially if you're like a big company, you have somebody pulling this way, this team's pulling this way, and like it's really easy for the messaging to get pulled apart. And this type of thing, this type of tool like Waikay can help, I think, highlight and potentially get buy-in for some of these difficult conversations that agencies or in-house brands might be having who are listening to this, being able to point to these gaps and saying, hey guys, like we need to work together because we're all saying different things. Right. To your point, the sales team that should have been doing this for years, it's easy, like this stuff can happen, right? Like we've all been there.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Yeah. So Dixon, thank you so much for joining. Where can people find you?
So Waikay stands for What AI Knows About You. So it's WAIKAY, and it's actually .io. But if Google doesn't get that right, then I'll be very surprised. And if you can't find that, then Dixon Jones. My name is Dixon with an X, and you can go to my .com or find me on LinkedIn.
All right, folks. If you have questions about any of this stuff, leave in the comments. I'll make sure I file over to Dixon. I'll be sharing links to all that stuff in the show notes, as well as on LinkedIn and our newsletter and all the places you hear and watch our content. So Dixon, thank you again so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. Good luck out there.